time with you tonight, I want to complete looking at some of the case examples of the mystery religions. We're going to concentrate on numbers 4 and 5 on your outline, and these are the two most important ones. We're not going to be through yet with mystery religions, but we're going to be through with looking at some of the introductory matters that we did, as well as pretty much looking at some case examples, case histories of the MRs. We started with Serapis or Osiris. We briefly touched on Cybele. Then we looked at Mithras. There are others, I might add, besides the ones that you have on your outline. I might mention a couple as we wrap up this evening, but those are some of the better known ones. Now tonight we're left with Dionysian and Eleusinian mystery religions. Dionysian and Eleusinian. They were not, when they were placed on the outline, put in a particular order there, because I might have started with Cybele, since that's such a weak one that we didn't spend much time on at all. But I did want to end with Dionysus and the Eleusinian mystery religions, because these are the most important ones. Let's start then with number 4. I have some of my Greek books here, some of my sculpture and painting and art books, and I can maybe show you some things about Dionysus. This ranks as one of the greatest and the most popular MRs. One of the, I didn't say the, but it ranks as one of the greatest and most popular mystery religions, especially followed by hordes of women devoted to the cause of the Greek god of wine and revelry, Dionysus. He's also known as the Roman god Bacchus, B-A-C-C-H-U-S. As we've already learned before, there's so many of these gods, and they'll go by a Greek and a Roman name, and they're, for the most part, direct counterparts of one another, and maybe not quite so much a counterpart, but certainly parallel to many of the Oriental as well as the Egyptian gods, because of the syncretistic practices that were developed. I might also add this was one of the most sexually blatant, or if you really want the term, orgiastic. It is a word, although we don't use it that often. We don't really have need of using it that often, but was one of the most orgiastic of the mystery religions, involving both men and women, but particularly having a very close following of devoted women. Now, he's the Greek god of wine and revelry, as I've said, and he commanded the female devotees of his cult to do all sorts of immoral things, which is what has made the name Dionysus or Dionysian person go down in infamy in history. You've probably heard of Dionysus before, or Bacchus. You probably either know him by his Greek or his Roman name. Let's discuss a little bit of the ceremony. We don't know a lot about step by step, but we do know a lot of what took place. It took place at night, out of doors. Now, they're mystery religions, and the Gospels, John chapter 3, speaks of darkness being a time to be mysterious, because you can commit those immoral acts basically unnoticed. So it's no surprise to find out that it was conducted at night, it was conducted out of doors. A temple was involved, but still they were out of doors, which, remember, a lot of these mystery religions are connected to nature and agriculture, so that's no surprise. And here are some of the things included. Now, if you thought my caricature of women's involvement in the ancient mystery religions, particularly Serapis, Osiris, Isis that we discussed last time, was just my opinion, well, that's just not true. It's not just my opinion. Women were the ones chiefly involved, and I think chiefly involved for the reasons that I described. And so each teaching is building on another. We have to more or less remember the characteristics in general that I gave you to start with about the MRs, and we can fill flesh on that skeleton by looking at some of these case examples, particularly Dionysian and Eleusinian mystery religions. There was wild dancing on the mountains. The children were put down to bed, or if they didn't have children, and many of them didn't, but if they had children, they were put in bed, and the husbands were tucked in, and there was wild dancing on the mountains. There was the use of wine and hypnotic or hallucinogenic drugs to produce an altered state of consciousness among the devotees. The most sexually blatant, orgiastic of them. Debauchery to the zenith. But it still has a lot of appeal because it's not just some old state religion. You can personally involve yourself in this, and you're also promised immortality and peace in life. I think after a night like this, it'd be easy to clean house the next day. If you survived the night and woke up without too much of a hangover, I guess the next day would go well. So the use of wine and hypnotic and hallucinogenic drugs. Some drugs, of course, are not hallucinogenic, but some are. Hallucinogenic drugs to produce an altered state of consciousness, ecstatic madness, singing, chanting, and screaming. Just giving you a list of some of the things. You can fill out the ceremony with your own imagination as it has been cultured by American television. Ecstatic madness, singing, chanting, screaming. Flute music. Flutes were big in Dionysian MR. Flute music, as well as other types, such as tambourines, are seen. I'll show you some pictures here in a moment of some of the Maenads hanging on the arms of Dionysus, the Greek god, with their tambourines. Tambourines and flutes. Homo, hetero, and bisexual acts. Very gross. I don't even want to try to describe some of the things, but and most of these were like this, perhaps except Mithras, since men were the only devotees there. But homo, hetero, and bisexual acts, the ripping apart and eating of wild animals. The women would corner some wild animal, a nocturnal creature, that night. That was part of the ceremony. You know, if you get this many women together on the top of a mountain with this altered state of consciousness, I guess they would do just about anything. And they'd corner these wild animals, grab them and rip them apart with their bare hands and eat the flesh raw. Perhaps even in the earlier days, now let me add a footnote here while you're writing that sentence, and then I'll finish that sentence. It seems like Christianity influenced the MRs later in history, and the MRs adopted some of Christianity and toned down some of the baser aspects of their worship. So in earlier days, it seems like that perhaps even human sacrifice was employed. The sacrifice of babies and children, the sacrifice of young boys, those seem to be the things to sacrifice. Although I'll read you a story here of the sacrifice of grown men as well. Now the women were called Maenads. I don't know if you've ever been called a Maenad before. You don't have to have manifested all of these characteristics to be a Maenad. But if you're ever frenzied about anything, you might be called a Maenad. It's not a well-known term, but that's what they were called. The Maenads were the female followers of the Greek god of wine and revelry, Dionysus. I've used that term on an occasion, so don't think I was describing you according to all of these characteristics here, just in a state of frenzy. The Maenads. Now, as I've said, this was the same god as the Roman god Bacchus. Now, there was almost confusion over, when I told you about Mithras, whether Mithras stabbed himself or stabbed the bull, you remember. So I brought a picture along to show you what one of these little statues look like, so it'll impress it on your memory, and in case there's any confusion still, although I doubt there is, you'll remember it now. He's the young man with the cape around his shoulders and the cap on his head. And there's, I think, a dog and a serpent climbing up on the bull, but this is Mithras. And this is what most of the statues would look like, riding on the back of the bull, thrusting the sacrificial knife into his throat. Now, if you want to see what Dionysus looked like, bottom left-hand corner. I think this is a vase, a picture on the side of a vase. Now he changes, bottom left-hand corner. He changes in different periods of history exactly what he looks like. These other things are just other things in Greek art. But for those of you that can see up close or wherever, there's a picture of Dionysus. No problem right there with what he's doing or with what's going on. I think I have a few more of him as well. Now, he was also worshipped as when he was an infant. So you'll see a lot of pictures of him in infant stage. Here's a mid-4th century BC statue of the god Hermes holding the infant god Dionysus from the temple of Hera on Mount Olympia, which is up here, the top left-hand corner. The little tiny thing in the arms of the god here is Dionysus. And then something that maybe you can see a little better. Here you have Eros with his little wings flying around. One of the Maenads is holding a stupefied Dionysus. Dionysus has a lyre in his hand that he's been playing, and she has a tambourine. And this would be one of the Maenads. I think this also was probably mid to late 4th century BC. I think this is the inside bottom of a bowl, looking down inside of a bowl. Now, there was a very famous play written by Euripides, which was entitled The Women of Madness, which is really what Maenad means. Or it's called the Bacchae, B-A-C-C-H-A-E, that deals with this, one of our good sources. Now, I have a book here, some Greek writing, some of Homer's Odyssey and Hesiod's of Works and Days, Sappho, Pindar, Aeschylus, Agamemnon, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes, Herodotus, Thucydides, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Demosthenes, Lucian. And one of these, Euripides, has, it's probably, a 50-page or so, dramatic enactment of some of the events that I've just described to you that would take place with these Maenads. That's why he entitles his work the Bacchae, after the Roman god Bacchus, or the Women of Madness. Now, let me see if I can tell you the background, and then I want to pick up, more than half of the way through the episode here. It's a play, and you've got, probably 8 people involved here in the play, Dionysus being one. And you've got an important woman who is one of these Maenads, and you have, I believe it's her son, whose name is Pentheus. Now Pentheus ends up dead. Towards the end of the play, then, the messenger, which is one of the people in this drama, announces, the son of Ichion, Pentheus, is dead. And then the chorus in the play, see, they would act a lot of this out. Remember, they would have whole stage productions of these things. The chorus then would reply, tell me, how did he die, the wicked man in his wickedness? The messenger then begins to relate the story. When we had left the settlements of Thebes and crossed the streams of Asopus, we began to strike into the hill country of Citharon, Pentheus and I, for I went with my master and the stranger who was our guide. First we rested on the soft grass of a glen. Our footsteps fell without a sound, and our voices shrank to whispers, so that we could watch. Watch what? Well, watch this display of the Maenads, the Bacchae, the Women of Madness. So we could watch, but not be seen. There lay a stretch of grass bordered by cliffs, sweet with streams and dim with the shadows of firs, where the women sat busying their hands in pleasant toil. Some restored the crown of ivy to a holy spear, and some sang, and others echoed the Bacchic antiphon. Unhappy Pentheus, from whom they still were hidden, said, I cannot see these pretended Maenads from where we're standing, stranger, but from those banks, or from the top of some great mountain fir, I could see clearly all their unholy acts. He wants to spy on them and see what takes place in one of these episodes. It was then the stranger worked his miracle. Seizing the top of a fir which thrust at heaven, he drew it down, down, down to the black earth. And it was bent as a bow or as a rim forced around the circle of a wheel. Like this the stranger bent that rugged trunk down to the earth as no man could have done. And seating Pentheus on the highest branches, he let it rise again between his hands gently, careful not to unseat the king. Sheer to the sheer heaven it towered, sweeping my master up on its crest. He had just come into view when the stranger vanished, and a voice we thought the gods cried from the sky, "Women, I bring the man who mocks us, and at my mysteries. Now let vengeance flash from your hands." Now Pentheus is in a heap of trouble. As he spoke these words, he cast a glow, a terror of fire between the heavens and earth, and the air went still, and the forest hushed its leaves. No living thing cracked the silence with its cry. But the women, who had heard the voice distinctly, stared up and stared around them. Again he cried, and Cadmus' daughters, once they recognized the call of Bacchus, flew over ragged crags, mad with the breath of their god. When they saw my master seated in the branches, at first some attacked him furiously with stones. Then, scaling a rock which towered opposite, shot at him with branches of mountain fir. Others hurled their holy spears through the air at Pentheus, their sorry mark, but could not hit him. Far from the reach of their fury, trapped past all escaping, sat their wretched king. At last they splintered an oak and tried to tear the roots from the ground with wooden bars. When this failed, Agave cried, "Come, circle the trunk and seize it, women, so that we may catch this climbing animal. He must not reveal the gods' dark mysteries." Numberless hands seized the tree and tore it from the ground. Down, down, down from the dizzy heaven, down to earth, down with 1,000 bitter cries of pain, he fell, knowing the end could not be far. His mother was the first to begin the slaughter and fell on him. He tore the band from his hair, that Agave might know her son in time, and touched her cheek and cried, "I'm your son, Pentheus, mother, the child of Icion's house. Have pity on me, mother. Do not make the blood of your son be atonement for his sins." But she, with the white of madness on her lips, with wildly rolling eyes and staggering senses, possessed by the god, ignored his plea. Sensing his arm with her foot against his ribs, she tore it out at the shoulder. Not by her strength alone. The god put his easy vigor in her hands. Ino labored on the other side, ripping his flesh. All to know, and all the women attacked. One mingling cry rose from them all, his screams, while he still had the breath to scream, their wails of triumph. One carried off an arm, another a foot in its sandal. Clawing nails stripped the ribs. Hands, slippery with blood, playfully toss the scraps of Pentheus. The body lies dismembered under rough rocks in the thick, dark undergrowth of the wood, broken and scattered. The wretched head, which his mother happened to catch in her hands, she has stuck on the pole of her holy spear, and bears it like the head of a mountain lion, leaving her sisters in meaned revel. She comes here glorying in her unhappy prey, crying out to Bacchus, her fellow hunter, her partner in the chase, the triumph giver, whose triumph fades and melts to a flood of tears. And it goes on. There is the climactic scene of the Bacchae, or the Women of Madness. Now that's a play written by Euripides. But no doubt things like that, very similar to that, actually took place in this mystery religion and worship of Dionysus. Seems like the Bible says something about drinking too much wine, that don't drink too much of it. It alters your state of consciousness, and you don't know exactly what's going to take place after that. Well, there's the Dionysian mystery religion. And finally, and fifthly, let's look at the best known, the most popular, the oldest, the most widespread of the MRs, the Eleusinian mystery religion. It's spelled for you on your outline, so I don't think I need to write it up here. The Eleusinian mystery religion. The best known, the most popular, the oldest, and the most widespread. Others were Oriental or Egyptian in origin. This one was born in Greece. This one is unique because it's born in Greece. But when I say it's born in Greece, that still doesn't mean that it does not have the syncretistic combinations that all of the others have had as well. It's actually centered in Eleusis. Eleusinian is a term named after the Greek city of Eleusis. Just take off some of those final letters and you'll have E-L-E-U-S-I-S, Eleusis, as well as Athens. Cicero tells us Athens' greatest gift to the world was the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, it doesn't really take place in Athens, but Athens was the chief city nearby. It was 10 or 12 miles away from Eleusis. But Eleusis was the city after which it's been named the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, this is one that you come across all the time. You see Dionysian mystery religion as well, but you see Eleusinian more than anything. It's the best known, the most popular, the oldest, the most widespread. And important because it originates in Greece. Dionysian, you could argue, originates in Greece, but you have too many similarities with the religions in Egypt and the religions in the Orient, in the East. But you've got similarities with the Eleusinian rites as well. So let's look at the ceremony then. We'll start with some of the preliminary steps in the ceremony. We do know a lot of things about this ceremony. Because it was so well known, so many people were involved, surely something would leak out sometime, and it did. A military truce was actually signed and called throughout all of the Greek states, just so the pilgrims could attend the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, when you call a military truce and you stop wars over this, it means it was a widespread and very significant religion. And I have said before that the MRs are the most potent, most significant forms of religious expression during the 1st century A.D., with the exception of Christianity. Very powerful form of religion. Now, let's give ourselves maybe a few steps here under preliminary concerns of the ceremony. The pilgrims would begin arriving in Athens. Athens was the hub to begin with. In mid-September. Now, it is connected with the spring and the fall, with the agriculture coming to life and dying, and therefore it is a little interesting that it begins at the initiation of the period of death rather than at the period of life. Many of them did take place in the spring, and this one did take place in the fall. But we'll maybe see some reasons why it was really fit here instead of earlier. Now, they would begin arriving anywhere from the 10th of September onward to find a place to stay and to get ready. Then on September the 19th, this was the official day of the ceremonies. We're still under preliminary steps. So on September the 19th, all of the pilgrims, we'll give you a number here in a moment, but all the pilgrims would head down to the Athens harbor, the sea, for ritual baptismal regeneration. After massive baptisms, they would travel back a short distance to Athens and have a huge sacrificial service in the late afternoon, just as the sun is beginning to set. A huge sacrificial service. Now, after the sacrifice, the pilgrims would begin the 10 to 12 mile walk to Eleusis, singing hymns to the infant Dionysus. Now, we just studied Dionysian. Dionysus is involved in this as well. Now, right as they got outside of Athens on their way to Eleusis, they would all, for the second time, dip themselves in water. This time not the sea, but a lake that was felt to be sacred. just outside of the city of Athens. And then after bathing themselves, now the sun is set and there are dying embers in the western sky, the people continue the walk, completed arriving at the temple at Eleusis at approximately midnight. A temple that had a seating capacity of 10,000 people. Now, before we go on and give you the actual ceremony, that's just the initiation. That's to get up to entrance into the city, the sacred city of Eleusis. Let me tell you what the whole religion is about. Now, this happened to have been back in my boyhood days when I was read many of these stories of the Greeks and the Romans and their gods. Greek and Roman mythology happened to be my favorite story. For some reason, I was really attached to this. And it all revolves around the goddess Demeter, who's the goddess of agriculture and fruitfulness. Now, she had a daughter. Her name changes. She has different names, but probably her most important name was Persephone. Persephone was a very beautiful, very gracious young woman. And one day when she was out walking, she was discovered by the god of the underworld, Pluto, his Greek name, or Dis, his Roman name. Or sometimes he is referred to as Hades because by association, that being the place, the realm of the underworld, he became attached in his name with the place where he lived. Hades, Pluto, we'll call him Hades since that's even a better known name than Pluto, but Hades was firstly and officially and originally the name of the abode of Pluto or Dis, the name of the realm of the underworld. Well, anyway, Hades spots Persephone. She's very beautiful, and he rapes her. After her rape, he forces her to go down to the underworld and live with him. Now, whenever this happened, Demeter, her only daughter, now being taken from her by this rapacious underworld god, weeps and cries and sheds many tears, and being the goddess of agriculture and fruitfulness as she is, decides to withhold all blessings from the earth, all agriculture, all fruitfulness, because of the absence of her daughter. Well, of course, this will bring ruin to men and to the gods, we might add. And so the gods are talked to, the gods intervene on the behalf of Demeter and her daughter, and they force Hades, Zeus or Jupiter, forces Hades or Pluto or Dis to allow Persephone to visit her mother once a year, either for 6 or 9 months, depending on how we want to count it. But we could just say for half of the year. That is, for that part of the year that is fruitful. But sometimes you'll see 9 months because you really only have 3 months in the wintertime. So her daughter is allowed to visit her. Persephone visit Demeter once a year during the springtime for 6 or 9 months, but has to return to the god of the underworld, Hades, in the fall. Now this to them was supposed to help explain how we got our seasons. Of course, they didn't have the biblical account of creation and the biblical account of the fall and the Noachian flood and all of this, which helps us understand about our seasons. They didn't understand how they got their seasons. Why cold? Why hot? Why rain? Why snow? Well, this is a very good story that makes a whole lot of sense if you believe in Greek or Roman mythology.
For the continuation of this message, please turn the tape over.
Well, this is a very good story that makes a whole lot of sense if you believe in Greek or Roman mythology. And because this was such a popular story, and again because everyone is dependent on agriculture, and the fruitfulness of crops that provide food for man and beasts, and the beasts then provide food as well as drink for man. So that's what makes the Eleusinian mystery religion the most important, because it was so vitally and so integrally connected with the spring and with the fall. So that's the background to this, Demeter and Persephone and Hades, or Pluto. Okay, then let's come to the initiation proper, the actual ceremony itself. It took place in darkness with torches, though. It's midnight, and they have to have some type of light, and they have many torches. They begin with more sacrifices. The sacrifices are followed by a communal meal. Yes, animal sacrifices. Followed by a communal meal. Notice the similarity with Christianity again. Followed by a communal drinking episode, not nearly to the extent of the Dionysian MR, but a drinking of wine from the cup. You would then have the performance of the drama. Notice how many of these things they've taken things from Christianity, they've taken just things from truth and have perverted them. But anyway, you have a performance of the drama, which probably, we're not certain on this, but probably had two stages to it. Now, although the Dionysian was the most lewd of them all, the Eleusinian was not pure by any means. The first part of the drama would probably be an enactment with real human beings of the rape of Persephone. So some type of outdoor theater would have been erected with a stage, and you would have the enactment of the rape of Persephone by Hades. So again, here we need our costumes, we need our background music, we need our set and props, we need our actors and actresses, but it's not acting, it's the real thing. Now, how they went about selecting the actors and actresses in this, we don't know. But this does seem to have taken place, the actual, by symbolism, rape of Persephone. And then the second part of the drama would have the sexual union of Zeus and Demeter, which produced Dionysus. We're back to him again. He would fit in well with this form of MR. Dionysus is the son of Zeus and Demeter, which would make him a brother then of Persephone. So in other words, you've got blatant sexuality here as well. At least it's not mass as far as we know. It's not orgiastic and as far as we can tell, it involves men and women. It's not homo as well as bi. It's just hetero. The rape of Persephone and the sexual relations between someone acting as Zeus, someone acting as Demeter, which would produce the new infant god Dionysus. Now remember, there is a temple here, and they go through their sacrificial ceremony and probably their communal meal and all this in the temple. And they come outside where it's dark, and they have their torches to have this whole drama. And sitting out there, you probably got two divisions of people, those who've already gone through the initiatory rites and who are part of the Eleusinian mystery religion, and those who are potential initiates at this time. They probably have a division of the old-timers and the newcomers here. And so the newcomers then would be required to walk through a darkened underground passage way or ways, which would of course symbolize the descent of Persephone each September, October to Hades, the underworld. And then they would resurrect back to the light on the other side of the underground tunnel. Their entrance would of course symbolize fall, and their exit would symbolize spring. They then were able to identify with the sadness of Demeter over the loss of Persephone. The only way to really identify with that is to experience what Persephone had experienced. So they experienced that by symbolically walking through the realm of Hades. Hades is one of those interesting, fascinating Greek words that has evolved in meaning over the years, but it would be important to us as Christians because it does appear so frequently in the New Testament, which we'll discuss some other time, what the backgrounds and everything of the word. Then the people, the potential initiates, they're not all the way in it yet. They've got to go through the whole ceremony. They would then come back to probably the outdoor arena, but it could have been inside, and have revelation of the secrets, the mysteries, the passing on of the knowledge of the cult to them. Hence their term mystery religion, the secrets and the mysteries of this particular cult, as well as a revelation in public of the sacred objects belonging to the local cult. And here we're giving you a specific of some of the generals I've given you earlier about the characteristics of the mystery religions. They would pass on secret information to the initiates, and they would have some, we don't know exactly what, but some sacred object or objects that belong to the cult. And to be able to see those, to be allowed to see those, was for one to know that he had been accepted fully into this cult. Do you remember? I want to give you one more step here, which was the conclusion to the ceremony, the culmination of this whole day worth of activities. Do you remember from our earlier discussion of the characteristics? Something was different at the end of the ceremony as compared to the beginning and the middle and everything that had happened up until then. Do you remember what that was? Well, so many of them are involved in so many orgies and screamings and yellings, and at the end there was always silence. That was the culmination of the experience, was silence. You were through with all of the revelry. It was time to be silent. And so the culmination, and here was it. This was the end of the ceremony that proved that you had been accepted and therefore you were loved by the gods. In complete silence before the old and the new. Up on the stage, the high priest or priestess would display a single ear of grain. Now that may sound anticlimactic to you, but that was the end of the ceremony. Which, of course, was a symbol of the fact that although we're now going into fall, this being September the 19th, by now we passed over into the 20th because we've gone past midnight. Although we're entering into the fall now, life will greet us at the other end of the tunnel, symbolized by this single ear of grain. Grain is nothing, in other words, until you have the right time, the right season, the right temperature, the right moisture, and then it will produce. Now, I want to end on the right note, so let me mention something else, and I want to come back to this. There were other forms of MRs besides these 5. Let me just give you a couple more. Orpheus was another MR that we could study, Orpheus. Very similar to Dionysian because he was the god of music. Dionysius was supposed to end up dead, and Orpheus in some places took his place. That was, of course, a Greek MR. There was a Syrian. We haven't mentioned anything about Syria, but we're back to the Orient, the Levant, the Eastern religions. There was a Syrian mystery religion that went by the name Atargatis. 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 Now, the name is similar to Astarte, to Ashtaroth, to all these other names that we've talked about before, and so probably it's the same goddess that we're talking about. This is a female, by the way. She was the fish goddess among the Syrians. Atargatis. And others. We're not going to discuss those. There are even some others I could name. But I think that you probably have a very good picture in your mind now of what the mystery religions were all about. If we wouldn't have looked at this in this much detail, you probably wouldn't, though. And especially, you'll probably never forget the story of the women of madness. Now, if you will, open your Bible to John 12. And I want to conclude by reading a passage here. This passage we'll discuss at another time. This passage then will conclude us tonight and introduce us to the next thing on your outline, if you take note of that as you're turning to John 12. Will conclude us for this evening. We'll introduce what we'll discuss next on the outline. What is your next thing there? Okay, New Testament appearances. What's the next thing? Isn't there one more? Okay. A combination of, we won't separate those. We'll just combine those together. John 12 and verse 20. Now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the feast. Interesting episode in John's Gospel, the life of Christ. It's not explained. But this is a very important chapter in John. Jesus now, it's toward the very end of his ministry, and it's just centering on the Jewishness of his opponents in Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, we have this thrown in there. Now, there were some Greeks among those who'd come up to the feast. Greeks. We don't find Greeks that often in John's Gospel or in Jesus' life. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. And Philip went to tell Andrew. Philip, in this gospel, seems always to be at a loss at what to do. And he always goes and asks someone else what they ought to do. So Philip goes to tell Andrew, and Andrew and Philip, in turn, told Jesus. Now, all we know about the Greeks thus far is they asked the question, Sir, we would see Jesus. We would like to see him. Jesus never talked to them in this account. They're never brought up again. He never responds to them. Or does he? Jesus replied, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. The man who loves his life will lose it, while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my heart is troubled, and what shall I say? Should it be, Father, save me from this hour? Well, hardly, because it's for this very reason I came to this hour. Therefore, Father, glorify your name. And a voice came from heaven, I have glorified it, and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered, and others said an angel had spoken to him. And Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world be driven out. But I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. And he said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. The crowd spoke up, we have heard from the law. Now this doesn't sound like those Greeks. They would know about the law. That the Christ will remain forever. So how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? Jesus said, you're going to have the light just a little while longer. Notice light now, light. While you have the light, walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. The man who walks in the dark does not know where he is going. Put your trust in the light while you have it, so that you may become sons of the light. And when he finished speaking, then he left and hid himself. Well, 24 will be the verse. Unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed, but if it dies, it produces many seeds.